The blood came first, then the ground. Her knees hit the frost-hardened earth at the exact place where the tree line thinned and the patrol markers began. Those deep claw gouges in the bark that every wolf in the Northern Territories knew meant Blackmere Pack. The impact sent a jolt through her swollen belly that made both babies shift at once, a rolling pressure like two fists pushing outward from inside her ribs. She tasted iron. She tasted dirt. The December wind cut through her coat, which was not really a coat at all, but a horse blanket she had stolen from a stable 3 days ago, the kind with the crosshatch stitching that left red grid marks on her shoulders where it rubbed. Lyra pressed her palms flat against the frozen mud and tried to push herself up. Her arms shook. They had been shaking since yesterday, since the last of the deer jerky ran out and her body began eating itself to feed the twins. She could feel them moving, restless, alive, and that single fact was the only reason she was still crawling north instead of lying down in a ditch to let the cold finish what her old pack had started. 3 weeks ago, she had been kneeling on the floor of Alpha Harlan's study in the Greyhaven compound, scrubbing the grout between the slate tiles with a toothbrush while his beta's mate Cordelia stood over her and listed the reasons she would never be permitted to keep the pregnancy. "You are unmated," Cordelia had said, examining her own cuticles. "You are Omega. You are 23 years old, and you have never shifted, not once. Your womb is either dead or was never there. The pack cannot feed 2 more mouths attached to a body that contributes nothing." Lyra had kept scrubbing. The grout was a particular shade of gray that never looked clean, no matter how hard she worked, and she had learned years ago that Cordelia did not actually want responses. Cordelia wanted an audience. But then Cordelia had said the thing that changed everything. She had leaned down close enough that Lyra could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive that clashed with the sourness underneath, and she had whispered, "The healers have agreed. Tomorrow morning. It will be quick. You will not even need to be awake." Lyra had stopped scrubbing. She did not argue. She did not cry. She waited until 2 in the morning, when the patrol rotation left a 6-minute gap at the eastern fence, and she climbed through the gap in the chain link where the groundskeeper had been meaning to fix the post for 3 months. She took the horse blanket from the stable, a box of deer jerky from the kitchen pantry, and a pair of boots 2 sizes too large that someone had left by the back door of the pack house. That was 21 days ago. She had walked north because north was the only direction that did not lead back to Greyhaven, or into the open plains where she would be visible from miles away. North meant forest. Forest meant cover. Cover meant survival, at least for a few more days, at least until she figured out something better than just walking. She had not figured out anything better. Now she was on her hands and knees at the border of a pack she knew only by reputation, which was this. The Blackmere Pack was ruled by an alpha king named Cale Voss, and no one who entered his territory uninvited ever came back to talk about it. Her vision blurred. The trees doubled, then tripled, then merged into a wash of gray and white. She felt the babies kick again, both at once, a synchronized drumbeat against her pelvic floor that sent a wave of nausea up through her empty stomach. She retched, but nothing came up. There was nothing left. She made it 4 more steps on her hands and knees before her elbows buckled, and she went down face first into the frost. The cold felt almost warm against her cheek. That was bad. She knew that was bad. When cold started feeling warm, it meant your body was giving up the fight. Just a minute, she thought. Just let me rest for 1 minute. The babies moved again. Slower this time. Quieter. She closed her eyes. She did not hear the patrol. 3 wolves moved through the tree line in formation, their paws silent on the frozen ground. The point wolf, a massive gray female named Sarah, caught the scent first and stopped so abruptly that the 2 males behind her nearly collided with her haunches. She lifted her muzzle. Her nostrils flared. Blood. Human sweat. Something else underneath, something strange and bright, like ozone before a lightning strike. Sarah shifted to human form, crouching naked in the frost without flinching, and pressed 2 fingers to the side of the woman's throat, pulse ready, skin like paper. She was burning with fever and freezing at the same time, a combination that meant her body had been fighting something for days and was losing. And she was pregnant, massively, unmistakably pregnant. Sarah looked at the 2 male wolves and said one word: Alpha. The word traveled fast, faster than a spoken message should have been able to move, because the Blackmere pack did not rely on phones or radios for urgent communication. They relied on the bond, the pack bond that connected every wolf in the territory to their alpha like threads in a web, vibrations traveling along invisible lines until they reached the center. Cale Voss felt it while he was standing in the war room of the Blackmere stronghold, studying a map of the southern border with his second, a scarred wolf named Torin, who had lost his left ear in a territorial dispute 6 years ago and wore his hair long on that side to cover the absence. The vibration came through the bond like a plucked string, urgent, directional, east-northeast near the Greyhaven border. Intruder, Cale said. Torin looked up. Hostile? Khalil paused. He could feel Sarah's emotional signature through the bond, and it was not alarm or aggression. It was something closer to distress, protective distress, the kind a wolf felt when it found a wounded animal too small to be a threat. No, he said, not hostile. He left the war room without another word. Torin followed, because Torin always followed, but Cale was already moving at a pace that made following difficult. Down the stone corridor through the main hall where the evening meal was being prepared and the smell of roasting elk and rosemary filled the vaulted space, out through the eastern gate into the cold. He shifted between one step and the next. His wolf was enormous, black-furred, amber-eyed, built like something that should have gone extinct in a previous age. The shift was effortless for him, as natural as breathing, and he covered the distance to the eastern border in 7 minutes at a dead run, weaving through the pine forest with a precision that came from knowing every root and stone in his territory. He smelled her before he saw her. The scent hit him like a physical force. It stopped him mid-stride, all 4 paws locking, his massive body skidding 2 feet in the frost before coming to a halt. His wolf made a sound he'd never made before. Not a growl, not a whine, but something between the two, something ancient and involuntary that came from a place deeper than instinct. Pine resin and night-blooming jasmine and the sharp, bright undertone of ozone. And blood. And fever. And underneath all of it, the unmistakable double heartbeat of twin pups. Mate. A word detonated in his skull like a grenade. His wolf surged forward, nearly ripping control from his human mind, and for 3 seconds, Cale Voss, Alpha King of the Blackmere pack, the wolf who had held absolute dominion over the largest territory in the northern provinces for 11 years without once losing control of his beast, stood trembling in the frozen woods like a pup feeling his first shift. He forced the shift back to human. He needed hands for this. He needed to be gentle, and his wolf was not gentle. His wolf was a battering ram of protective fury that wanted to scent mark every inch of her skin, and then tear apart whatever had left her broken and bleeding at his border. Sierra was crouched beside her, one hand on the woman's shoulder. She looked up when Kyle approached, and her eyes went wide. In 11 years of service, she had never seen her alpha's face look like that. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. His amber eyes had gone fully gold, the wolf pushing through, and his hands were shaking. "Alpha," Sarah said carefully. "She is alive, but barely. Severe malnutrition. Fever. The pups are still moving, but their heartbeats are weak." Cale knelt beside the woman. She was small. That was the first thing he noticed. Small in a way that spoke of years of inadequate food, her wrists so thin he could have circled both of them with one hand. Her hair was matted and dirty, a dark brown that might have been lighter if it were clean. The horse blanket she wore as a coat had slicked off one shoulder, revealing a collarbone that jutted up like a shelf. Her face was pressed into the frost, and he could see a scar on her temple, old and silvery, shaped like a crescent moon. The kind of mark left by a ring when someone backhands you hard enough to split skin. He reached out and touched her cheek with the back of his fingers. Her skin was ice, but the moment his skin met hers, something happened that he would never be able to adequately describe to anyone who had not experienced it. Warmth. Not physical warmth, that came too, a warmth that started at the point of contact and spread through his entire body like ink in water, filling every hollow space, every cold corner, every place where 11 years of solitary leadership had calcified into something hard and numb. His wolf went completely still. Not calm. Still. The kind of stillness that comes when a predator has found the thing it has been hunting for so long it had forgotten it was searching. "Who did this to you?" he said. His voice was quiet. The quietness was worse than shouting. Sarah knew this. When Kyle Voss got quiet, people died. And the woman did not respond. She was unconscious. Her breath came in shallow hitches that rattled in her chest, and each exhale formed a tiny cloud in the freezing air that dissipated before it fully formed. Kale slid one arm beneath her shoulders and the other beneath her knees, careful of her belly, and lifted her. She weighed nothing. She weighed less than nothing. She weighed less than the training dummies they used for the adolescent wolves, and the realization of that made something in his chest crack like ice over a river in early spring. She murmured something when he lifted her. A sound, not a word. Her head fell against his shoulder, and her hand, which had been hanging limp, curled reflexively into the fabric of his shirt. Her fingers were blue at the tips. Torin had caught up. He stood at the edge of the clearing, breathing hard, and took in the scene with the quick tactical assessment of a seasoned second. Alpha carrying an unknown woman. Alpha's eyes fully gold, Alpha's entire body radiating a possessive energy so intense it made the pack bond vibrate like a struck bell. "Mate," Torin said. It was not a question. Hale did not answer. He was already walking, carrying her through the forest toward the stronghold, his stride long and unhurried despite the urgency clawing at his insides. He would not run. Running would jostle her. She had been jostled enough. "Get Maeve," he said over his shoulder. "Tell her to prepare the healing ward. 2 heartbeats besides the mother's. Twins, and send a scouting party to the Greyhaven border. I want to know who she is and who she was running from. Full report by morning." Torin nodded once and disappeared into the trees. Sarah fell into step beside her Alpha, matching his pace. She watched the woman's face as they walked. Even unconscious, even gaunt and filthy and fever bright, there was something about her that pulled at the eye. A bone structure that would be striking if there were any flesh on it. Lips that moved silently, forming words in whatever dream or delirium held her. Sarah glanced at Kale. His face had not changed. Still granite, still murderous. But the way he held the woman, the way his fingers spread wide across her back as if trying to cover as much of her as possible with his own body heat, the way he adjusted his grip every few steps to keep her head steady against his shoulder. Sarah had seen Kale carry wounded soldiers off battlefields with less care. She did not comment. She had not survived 11 years as his point patrol by saying things out loud. The Blackmere stronghold rose out of the forest like a piece of the mountain that had decided to become a building. It was old stone, dark gray, with narrow windows that glowed amber in the evening light. The main gate was iron and oak, 20 feet tall, and it opened before Kyle reached it because the wolves on watch had felt him coming through the bond and had the sense to get out of his way. The great hall fell silent when he walked through it. 60 wolves, seated at long tables for the evening meal, stopped eating, stopped talking, Nortal stopped breathing, some of them because the sight of their alpha carrying a broken woman in his arms with gold eyes and a jaw like a locked vault was not something you breathed casually through. Maeve was already waiting at the entrance to the healing ward. She was the pack healer, a stout woman in her 50s with grey-streaked red hair and hands that smelled permanently of calendula and antiseptic. She took one look at the woman in Kael's arms and her expression went from professional readiness to genuine alarm. "How long?" she said, stepping aside to let him through. "Unknown. Days at minimum. Weeks more likely. The pups. Still alive. Both of them." Maeve led him to the main treatment room, a warm space with stone walls and a fire already burning in the hearth. A bed had been prepared with clean linens and wool blankets, and the room smelled of dried lavender and wood smoke, a smell that Lyra, in her delirium, would later associate with the first safety she had known in years. Kael laid her on the bed with a gentleness that would have shocked anyone who knew his reputation. The Alpha King of Blackmere, the wolf who had torn out the throat of the previous Alpha at 19 and united 3 warring packs through a combination of strategic brilliance and overwhelming violence, set her down as if she were made of eggshell and breath. He did not let go immediately. His hand lingered on her hair, pushing a matted strand away from her face, and in that motion Maeve saw the scar on the woman's temple and the bruises on her wrists, green-yellow fading bruises that spoke of hands gripping too hard, too often. "Out," Maeve said, not unkindly. "I need to examine her, and I need space." Kael looked at her. For a moment Maeve thought he would refuse, and she prepared herself for the argument, but something in his expression shifted. Not softened, rearranged. The wolf retreated, just enough for the king to take over, and the king understood that the healer needed room. "I will be outside the door." "Of course you will." He left. He stood in the corridor with his back against the stone wall, arms folded, eyes closed. Wolves passing through the hall gave him a wide berth. The bond was radiating something they had never felt from their alpha before, a frequency that was protective and territorial and possessive, and underneath all of it, terrified. Kael Voss was terrified, and none of them knew what to do with that information, so they did the wise thing and pretended not to notice. Inside the healing ward, Maeve worked quickly. She cut away the horse blanket and the thin cotton dress underneath, cataloging injuries with the clinical efficiency of someone who had been patching wolves back together for 30 years. Malnutrition, severe, dehydration, a hairline fracture in the left wrist, partially healed and poorly set, probably 3 to 4 weeks old. Bruising on both arms, both shins, and across the ribs on the left side, a healing bite mark on the right forearm, not a mating bite, but a punishment bite, the kind an alpha gives to discipline a subordinate. The scar on her temple. Multiple small burn scars on the backs of her hands, the kind you get from kitchen work, from oil spattering in oven racks, and the belly enormous on her tiny frame, drum-tight and warm to the touch. Maeve placed her hands on either side and felt the pups move, sluggish but present, and she let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Maeve started an IV drip, warm saline and glucose, and wrapped the woman in heated blankets. She cleaned the wounds, applied salve to the worst of the chapping and cracking on her hands and feet. She checked the partially healed wrist and shook her head at the angle of it. Someone had either set it badly or not set it at all. She opened the door. Kael was exactly where she had left him, a wall of barely contained violets leaning against stonework. "She will live," Maeve said. "The pups will live, assuming we can get nutrition into her fast enough. She is somewhere around 7 months along with twins, which on her frame is dangerous regardless of circumstances. She has been starving for weeks. She has been beaten probably regularly over a period of years. The wrist was broken roughly a month ago, and whoever was responsible did not bother to treat it properly. She has a punishment bite on her forearm." Kael said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, His voice had dropped to a register that Maeve associated with the formal declarations he made before executing traitors. Greyhaven, that would be my guess. The sound that came from him was not entirely human. A vibration in his chest, subsonic, felt more than heard, the kind of sound that made stone dust drift from the ceiling and the flames in the wall sconces flicker. "I want her identity confirmed," he said. "When she wakes, I speak to her first. No one else. No one enters this room without my permission. Post 2 guards, wolves, I trust. Sarah and Brex." Maeve nodded. She hesitated, then added, "Kyle, the mate bond. I can smell it from here. Your scent is already all over her. I know. She is unconscious and pregnant and damaged. Whatever the bond is telling you." "I know, Maeve." He looked at her directly, and for a moment the healer saw something in his amber eyes that she had not seen since he was a 19-year-old boy standing over the body of his predecessor, with blood on his hands and the weight of a kingdom settling onto his shoulders. Fear, not of an enemy. Fear of himself. Fear of what he might become in the grip of a bond this powerful aimed at someone this fragile. "I will not hurt her," he said. "I know you will not. That is not what I am worried about." "What are you worried about?" Maeve considered lying. She chose not to. "That you will burn the world down before she has a chance to decide whether she wants you to." Cale held her gaze for 3 heartbeats. Then he turned and walked down the corridor toward the war room, and every wolf he passed flattened themselves against the wall. Lyra woke to warmth, which confused her because warmth had not been part of her reality for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like as a baseline rather than a fleeting accident. She was lying on something soft. Blankets. Multiple layers of them, heavy wool that smelled of cedar and something herbal she could not immediately identify. An IV line ran into the back of her left hand, taped down neatly. She opened her eyes. Stone ceiling. Warm firelight. A room she did not recognize. Fear came first, instinctive and total. She tried to sit up, and her body immediately informed her that sitting up was not currently an option. Her abdominal muscles screamed, her wrist throbbed. Her head pounded with the particular viciousness of a dehydration headache, even though the IV suggested someone was working on that. The babies kicked both at once, strong and sharp, and the relief of feeling that kicked a hole in her fear large enough for rational thought to crawl through. She was alive. They were alive. Someone had found her, brought her somewhere warm, attached an IV. These were not the actions of someone who intended to harm her. She turned her head on the pillow and saw him. He was sitting in a chair beside her bed, not sleeping, not reading, just sitting, forearms on his knees, hands loosely clasped, watching her with amber eyes that caught the firelight and threw it back. He was the largest man she had ever seen, not just tall but built, with a density that spoke of muscle layered over muscle. The kind of body that could not be built in a gym but only through years of shifting and fighting and running in wolf form. His hair was black, cut short on the sides and longer on top, pushed back from a face that was not handsome in any conventional sense. It was too sharp for that, too angular, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the walls. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye down to the hinge of his jaw, white and old, and another crossed his throat in a thin line that should have killed him. He was watching her the way a wolf watches a deer. Not hungry, patient, certain. Now she opened her mouth, and what came out was not the defiant demand she intended. It was a croak, barely audible, scraped raw by days of cold air and disuse. "Where am I?" "Blackmere," he said. His voice was deep and quiet and traveled through her body like a bass note played on an instrument she did not know she contained. She felt it in her sternum. She felt it in her spine. "You collapsed at my border, carrying twins. In December, wearing a horse blanket." She blinked. The specificity of the inventory startled her. Most alphas she had known spoke in generalities and commands. This one spoke like someone who had catalogued every detail and filed them in order of severity. My border, he had said, not our border. Maya, you are the Alpha King, she said. Kale Boss. She knew the name, and Calum, everyone knew the name. The wolf who had killed his way to the throne at 19. The king who had tripled Blackmere's territory through a decade of calculated warfare. The Alpha whose beast was rumored to be so powerful that no wolf within 500 miles would challenge him, not out of cowardice, but out of simple self-preservation. She was lying in his healing ward, in his bed, with his IV in her hand and his blankets on her body. I was not trying to trespass, she said quickly. I did not know how close I was to the border. I was just walking. I will leave as soon as I can stand. Something changed in his face. It was subtle. The jaw tightened. The amber eyes narrowed by a fraction. It was not anger directed at her, she realized, but anger at the fact that she was already planning to leave, as if her departure was an outcome he had considered and rejected before she had even regained consciousness. You will not leave, he said. It was not a command. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same flat certainty with which one might say the sun will rise. Fear spiked through her again, but it was threaded with something else. Something that had happened the moment he spoke, a vibration in her chest that was completely new, a warmth that had nothing to do with the blankets. Her wolf. The wolf she had never been able to reach, the wolf that Greyhaven's healers had declared dormant or dead, stirred. Not much. A flicker, a twitch, like a limb that had been asleep for years and was just beginning to feel the pins and needles of returning circulation. She flinched visibly, her hand going to her chest. Hale noticed. Of course he noticed. You felt that, he said. I do not know what I felt. You do. He leaned forward and the chair creaked under his weight. The scent of him washed over her, pine and wood smoke and something metallic, like the air before a storm. And her wolf stirred again, stronger this time, pressing against the inside of her ribs as if trying to reach him. No, she said. She did not even know what she was refusing. She just knew that the last time she had let herself want something, it had been a safe place to raise her babies, and that wanting had nearly gotten all three of them killed. What is your name? He asked. Lyra. Lyra Vane. Greyhaven Pack. Former Greyhaven Pack, he corrected. You ran. They were going to take my babies. Something crossed his face that was not quite an expression. A shadow. A tightening around the eyes that in a less controlled man would have been a snarl. Mabe tells me you have been beaten regularly, that your wrist was broken a month ago and never treated, that you carry a punishment bite. Lyra said nothing. She looked at the ceiling. The stone was old, fitted together without mortar, each piece interlocking with its neighbors in a pattern that must have taken months to design. She heard him exhale through his nose. A controlled sound. I'm sending a delegation to Greyhaven tomorrow, he said. I need to know who is responsible. It does not matter, she said to the ceiling. I am out. That is enough. It is not enough. His voice dropped a register, and that bass note vibration moved through her again, stronger, insistent. It is nowhere near enough, but it is a start. She turned her head and looked at him. He was closer than she expected. When had he moved the chair closer? His eyes were fully gold now, the wolf visible just behind the amber, and she could see the effort it was costing him to stay seated, to keep his hands loosely clasped instead of reaching for her. Why do you care? She said. He held her gaze. He did not answer immediately. When he did, it was with a simplicity that unraveled something tightly wound inside her chest. You know why? She did. The vibration between them was undeniable. The warmth, the way her dead wolf was waking up in his presence like a seed that had been frozen in permafrost, and was now thawing into something green and impossible. Mate Bond, she whispered. Yes. And the fear she felt then was not of him, but of the hope that was already unfurling in the space behind her sternum, because hope was the most dangerous thing an Omega could carry. More dangerous than twins, more dangerous than a broken wrist, more dangerous than crossing 300 miles of frozen forest in a horse blanket. Hope could kill you in ways that cold and hunger could not, because hope made you stay, and staying made you vulnerable. I cannot, she said. Her voice cracked on the second word. You can. You are. The bond exists whether you accept it or not. That I will not force it. He paused, and the effort of that pause was visible in the tendons of his neck. I will not force anything. You will eat. You will heal. The pups will grow. And when you are ready, if you are ready, we will discuss what this is. She stared at him. In Greyhaven, an alpha who discovered a mate bond would have planed on the spot. Marked. Bitten. Bitten. Taken ownership in the most literal sense, because that was what Omegas were in Greyhaven. Owned things. This man, this king with his war scars and his gold eyes and his reputation for killing anyone who challenged him, was sitting in a chair beside her bed and telling her she could choose. She did not trust it. She could not afford to trust it. But her wolf pressed against her ribs again, and for the first time in her entire life she heard it. Not words, a feeling, but a single bone-deep feeling that translated roughly into safe. She slept for 2 days. Maeve came and went, changing IB bags, checking the pup's heartbeats with a stethoscope that she warmed against her palm before pressing to Lyra's belly. The babies were responding to the nutrition. Their heartbeats strengthened. Their movements became more frequent, and Maeve declared with professional satisfaction that they were fighters. Cale did not sit in the chair for 2 days straight. He left to handle pack business, to eat, to deal with a border dispute on the western edge of the territory that required his physical presence. But Sarah, who was posted outside the healing ward door, reported to Torin, who reported to no one but who mentioned to the kitchen staff, who mentioned to the laundry workers, who mentioned to everyone that the Alpha King returned to the healing ward every 3 hours without fail, that he stayed for precisely 20 minutes, that he sat in the same chair, but he did not touch her. On the 3rd day, Lyra woke properly. Not the half-conscious haze she had drifted through previously, but actual waking with clear eyes and a mind that could hold a thought for more than 30 seconds. The first thing she noticed was that someone had washed her hair. It was clean, brushed, spread across the pillow in waves of dark brown that turned out, when cleaned, to have threads of auburn running through them. She was wearing a soft cotton nightgown that was too large for her, but infinitely better than the horse blanket. Her wrist had been properly splinted and wrapped. The second thing she noticed was that her wolf was awake. Not fully, not roaring and ready, but present in a way it had never been in 23 years of silence. She could feel it curled at the base of her spine, a warm weight, breathing when she breathed. A companion she had never met. The third thing she noticed was the smell of food. A tray sat on the table beside a bed. Bone broth in a ceramic bowl still steaming. A small portion of brown bread, thickly buttered, a cup of tea that smelled of ginger and honey. Beside the tray, a folded note in handwriting that was heavy and angular, and surprisingly precise for a man whose hands looked like they could bend steel. It read, "Eat slowly. Maeve says your stomach needs time to remember what food is. I will be in the hall if you need me." K. She ate slowly. The broth was rich, made with marrow and herbs, and it was the single best thing she had ever tasted. Not because it was exceptional broth, though it was, but because her body had been so deprived for so long that the simple act of warm liquid entering her stomach felt like revelation. She ate the bread in tiny pieces, letting each one dissolve on her tongue. She drank the tea. Then she swung her legs off the bed and stood. The world tilted. But while she grabbed the bed frame, her legs shook but held. The babies shifted at the change in position, and she placed one hand on her belly and whispered, I know, but she needed to see more than stone walls and firelight. She needed to understand where she was. She made it to the door and opened it. Sarah was leaning against the opposite wall, arms crossed. The female wolf looked at Lyra with an expression that was not friendly but also not hostile. "Evaluating. You should be in bed," Sarah said. "I need to move. If I lie still any longer, I will lose my mind." Sarah studied her for a moment. Then she pushed off the wall and fell into step beside her, not touching, not guiding, just present. The stronghold was massive, stone corridors, high ceilings, tapestries on the walls depicting wolves in various states of battle and celebration. Through an archway, Lyra caught a glimpse of the great hall, a cavernous space with a vaulted ceiling, and a fireplace large enough to roast a whole elk. Wolves sat at long tables eating breakfast, talking. A few looked up as she passed. Their eyes flickered to her belly, to the healing ward corridor behind her, and she saw recognition in their faces. Not of her specifically, but of what she represented. The alpha's mate. Word traveled fast in the pack. She kept walking. Sarah led her. Down a corridor that ended in a heavy wooden door, and through it, a courtyard. Open air, grey, December sky, a training yard where wolves in human form were sparring with a controlled ferocity that made Greyhaven's training sessions look like children's games. And there he was. Cal stood at the center of the training yard, shirtless despite the cold, his body a topography of old scars and dense muscle. He was correcting a young wolf's stance, his hands repositioning the boy's shoulders with a firmness that was somehow also patient. The young wolf's eyes were wide with the particular terror of someone receiving personal attention from the most dangerous predator in 500 miles. Kyle must have felt her through the bond, because he looked up before she made a sound. Their eyes met across the courtyard, amber to brown, and the mate bond sang between them like a wire-pulled taut. She felt her wolf press forward, pushing against her ribs, and her hand went to her chest again. He said something to the young wolf, who nodded rapidly and scrambled away with visible relief. Then he walked toward her, and she watched the other wolves in the training yard react. They did not cower. They rearranged, like planets adjusting their orbits when the sun moves. "You should be in bed," he said when he reached her. It was the same thing Sarah had said, but it sounded different in his voice. Less directive, more concerned. "You said you would not force anything. You care. Eating and resting are not included in that promise." She almost smiled. She caught it before it fully formed, but he saw it. She knew he saw it, because something shifted in the granite of his face, a hairline fracture that let light through. The scouting party returned that evening. Torin delivered the report in the war room, where Lyra was not present because Kyle had not invited her, and she had returned to the healing ward to rest after her excursion through the stronghold left her legs trembling. But she heard the aftermath. Everyone in the stronghold heard the aftermath, because when Cale Voss was angry, the entire building knew it. Not through shouting, through silence. A particular quality of silence that settled over the stronghold like a pressure change before a storm. The scouting party had found this. Lyra Vane, age 23, listed in Greyhaven's records as an Omega servant, assigned to the Alpha household at age 12 after the death of her mother. Father unknown, no wolf manifestation on record. Designated as breeding ineligible by the pack healers at age 18 due to lack of wolf and Omega status. The pregnancy had been unauthorized. The father was a Greyhaven warrior named Dex, who had forced himself on her during a pack celebration 9 months prior, and had subsequently denied involvement. When Lyra reported the pregnancy, Alpha Harlan had referred the matter to his beta's mate, Cordelia, who had ordered termination on the grounds of pack resource management. When Lyra fled instead of submitting, Alpha Harlan had declared her a deserter and placed a retrieval order. Not because he wanted her back, because an Omega who fled successfully set a precedent, and precedents were dangerous. Kyle received this information in the war room with Torin and 3 of his senior commanders present. He listened without interrupting. When Torin finished, the silence that followed was so complete that one of the commanders later said he could hear the candles burning. 3 things, Kyle said. His voice was flat. conversational, the most dangerous tone he possessed. First, send a formal communication to Alpha Harlan, informing him that Lyra Vane is under my protection, that any attempt to retrieve her will be treated as an act of war, and that I am not in the habit of repeating myself. Second, I want the name of the warrior. Dex, I want his location, his rank, his patrol schedule. I want to know what he eats for breakfast. Third, I want a meeting with Alpha Harlan, in person, on neutral ground, before the new year. Torrin, who had been Kale's second for 9 years and understood the weight of his Alpha's silences better than anyone, asked only one question. How diplomatic should the communication be? Kale looked at him. Legible, he said. Beyond that, I do not care. Over the next 2 weeks, Lyra healed. A body, given adequate nutrition and rest and the surprisingly potent boost of the mate bond's proximity, responded with a speed that impressed even Maeve. The hollows in her cheeks filled. The bruises faded. Her wrist, in its proper splint, began to set correctly. The babies grew so rapidly that Maeve had to adjust her estimate of the due date forward by a week. Her wolf grew too. Each day it was more present, more defined. She could feel its personality now, different from her own, wilder, more direct, less afraid. It pressed forward whenever Kyle was near, and she began to understand that her wolf had not been dead or dormant. It had been suppressed. In Greyhaven, where Omegas were told they were wolfless, where the pack's healers had looked at the girl whose wolf was simply too afraid to emerge in a hostile environment and declared it absent, her wolf had retreated so far inward that even Lyra had believed it was gone. But it was not gone. It had been waiting. The safety, for a bond strong enough to coax it out. She began spending time outside the healing ward. Maeve protested, but ultimately could not argue with the fact that movement and fresh air were improving Lyra's vitals faster than bed rest. She walked the corridors, the courtyard, the grounds surrounding the stronghold, always with Sarah or Brex nearby. Though the guards became less formal as the days passed, the Blackmere wolves watched her with curiosity and, increasingly, with something approaching acceptance. She was a puzzle. An Omega from a hostile pack, pregnant, wolfless or nearly so, who had somehow become their Alpha King's fated mate. Some were suspicious, most were pragmatic. The Alpha had found his mate, the mate was pregnant. The pack would adapt, because that was what packs did. Lyra found herself, without quite meaning to, gravitating toward the stronghold's kitchen. It was a massive space, the kind of industrial kitchen that fed 60 wolves twice a day, plus snacks and late-night raids on the pantry. The head cook was a wolf named Petra, broad-shouldered and perpetually flushed from the heat, who ran her domain with the organizational precision of a military commander and the creative instincts of an artist. Lyra stood in the doorway of the kitchen on her 5th day up and watched Petra directing 3 assistants through the preparation of the evening meal with the focused intensity of a conductor. Venison stew, root vegetables, fresh bread, a berry compote that filled the air with the tart sweet smell of blackberries reduced with sugar and a splash of brandy. "You are either coming in or going out," Petra said without looking up from the dough she was kneading. "Standing in doorways makes the draft worse." Lyra stepped in. "I used to cook," she said. "At Greyhaven. It was the one thing they let me do that I actually wanted to do." Petra looked at her then, assessed her with the same quick practicality that seemed to characterize every wolf in Blackmere. "You are the Alpha's mate, apparently. Can you make bread?" "Yes." Petra pulled a ball of dough from the larger batch and slapped it onto the counter in front of an empty station. "Show me." Lyra made bread. Not the thin, perfunctory loaves she had been permitted to make at Greyhaven, where the kitchen matron had considered flavor a waste of resources. She made the bread her mother had taught her before she died, a dark rye with caraway seeds and a honey glaze, the kind that needed to be worked with firm hands and patience, the kind that filled a room with a smell like earth and sweetness. When it came out of the oven, Petra broke off a piece, chewed it thoughtfully, and said nothing for a long moment. "That is the best bread I have eaten in this kitchen, and I have been running this kitchen for 14 years. Lyra felt something crack behind her eyes. Not quite tears, a pressure, the release of a pressure that had been building for years. The small, devastating experience of being good at something and having someone notice. She became a regular in the kitchen after that. Not as a servant. Petra made that distinction clear on the first day with a bluntness that Lyra was learning to appreciate as a Blackmere cultural trait. You are the alpha's mate. You outranks me, you outranks me, everyone in this kitchen, and frankly most of the wolves in this stronghold. If you want to bake, you bake because you want to, not because someone told you to. The moment it becomes obligation instead of choice, you stop. Are we clear? They were clear. Kael found out about the baking from Torin, who found out from Sarah, who found out from Petra, who told her because Petra told everyone everything and considered gossip a public service. He said nothing about it directly, but the next morning a set of professional baking tools appeared in the kitchen. A marble rolling pin, a Danish dough whisk, a lame for scoring bread. Tools that were not available in Blackmere's regular supply lines and had clearly been sourced through the trade network at some expense. Petra held up the Danish whisk and said to no one in particular, "The Alpha King just special ordered baking equipment for his mate. I have been requesting a new oven for 3 years." The push-pull between Lyra and Kael was constant, a gravitational negotiation between two bodies that were drawn together by a force neither could fully control or fully surrender to. She wanted him. That was the terrifying truth she could not outrun. Not just the bond. Though the bond was powerful, a physical ache when he was close, and a hollow emptiness when he was far. She wanted him because of the way he corrected the young wolf's stance with patient hands, because of the note he left with her food, because he had not touched her, not once in 2 weeks, because every time she entered the room where he was, his entire body oriented toward her like a compass finding north, and every time, without fail, he held himself back. She watched him at the evening meal, sitting at the head of the long table with Torin at his right. He ate the way he did everything else, with an economy of motion that wasted nothing. He listened to a report from one of his border patrols, and asked 3 questions that cut through 20 minutes of hedging to reach the core issue. He noticed a young wolf at the far end of the table, sitting alone, and sent Sarah to check on her. He glanced at Lyra and caught her watching him. She did not look away. Neither did he. After the meal, she found him in the corridor outside the great hall. "I want to understand something," she said. "Tell me. You are the Alpha King. You could have claimed me the moment you found me. No one would have questioned it. The bond gives you the right. Why did you not?" He considered this. The firelight from the hall cast moving shadows across his scarred face. "Because a right exercised against someone's will is not a right," he said. "It is a crime wearing a crown." She stared at him. In Greyhaven, power meant the opposite. Power meant taking. Power meant the strong consuming the weak and calling it natural order. This man had more power than any alpha she had ever encountered, and he wielded it like a scalpel rather than a hammer. Something in her chest unlocked. Not all at once. A turn of a key. A first movement in a mechanism that had been frozen for a very long time. "I am starting to believe you," she said. "Good." His jaw tightened. "Because my wolf is making this very difficult and your bread is making it worse." "My bread? It smells like you. The whole stronghold smells like you now. My wolf thinks you are claiming territory through baked goods." She laughed. She had not laughed in so long that the sound startled her, a strange hiccuping thing that sounded more like a sob, and his expression did something complicated that ended in the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him, a slight upward movement at one corner of his mouth that transformed his entire face from formidable to devastating. She wanted to touch him. Her hand rose almost involuntarily, and she saw him see it, saw the gold flood his irises, saw his control strain at its seams. She pulled her hand back. "Not yet," she whispered. "Not yet," he agreed, but his voice was rough. and the space between them hummed. 2 days later, Cordelia arrived at the Blackmere border. She came with a delegation of 6 Greyhaven wolves, all warriors, and she came bearing a formal demand for the return of pack property. She used those words, pack property, as if Lyra were a tool that had been misplaced. The meeting took place in the Neutral Hall, a stone building that sat precisely on the border between territories and was used for inter-pack negotiations. Cale brought Torin, Sara, and 4 of his senior warriors. He did not bring Lyra. He did not tell her about the meeting until afterward, a decision she would later argue with him about and which he would concede was wrong. Cordelia was tall, blonde, immaculately dressed, in a way that seemed deliberately out of place in the rough borderlands. She wore a wool coat with a fur collar and leather gloves, and she smelled of that same floral perfume that Lyra had described, the one with the sour undertone. She sat at the negotiation table and crossed her legs and looked at Cale with the particular expression of a person who believes their position is unassailable. "Arthur Harlan has been patient," she began. "The Omega Lyra is a registered member of the Greyhaven Pack. She fled unlawfully. She carries an unauthorized pregnancy. We are here to collect her and resolve this matter." Cale said nothing. He let the silence stretch until Cordelia shifted in her seat. "Are you going to respond?" she said. "I am waiting for you to say something worth responding to." Cordelia's mouth thinned. She was not accustomed to being dismissed. In Greyhaven, she was the second most powerful woman in the pack, and she had built that power carefully over 15 years of strategic cruelty and social manipulation. She was good at what she did. What she did was identify weakness and exploit it. "The Omega belongs to Greyhaven," she said. "This is not a matter of opinion. Pack law is clear. Pack law does not override the mate bond." Cale's voice was level. "The woman you are calling an Omega and treating as property is my fated mate. She is carrying twin pups under my protection. She will not be returned, collected, or resolved. She will remain in Blackmere for the rest of her natural life." Cordelia stared at him. For 3 seconds her mask slipped, and what showed underneath was not anger or calculation, but genuine shock. The possibility that the wolfless Omega servant she had tormented for 11 years could be the fated mate of the most powerful alpha on the continent had clearly never occurred to her. "That is impossible," she said. "She has no wolf." "She does. Our healers examined her. Your healers were wrong, or lying, or both." Cordelia recovered quickly. She was, Cale noted cynically, resilient in the way that cruelty makes people resilient, by refusing to acknowledge inconvenient realities. "Alpha Harlan will not accept this," she said. "If you harbor a Greyhaven deserter, it will be considered an act of aggression." Cale leaned forward. The table between them was solid oak, 8 inches thick, and it creaked. "I want you to listen carefully," he said, and his voice dropped into the register that made Torin's hand move instinctively to the knife at his belt. "Because I am going to say this once, and I am not going to say it politely. Lyra Vane was starved, beaten, broken, bitten, and driven from your pack while pregnant with twins. She was treated as subhuman for 11 years. A warrior in your pack assaulted her and was not held accountable. Your healers ordered the termination of her pregnancy without her consent. She crawled 300 miles through Winter Forest to escape you. If Alva Harlan wants a war over his right to continue abusing a pregnant woman, I will give him one. I will give him the kind of war that names are forgotten after. And I will start with you." He said the last 4 words looking directly into Cordelia's eyes, and whatever she saw there made the color drain from her face like water from a broken glass. In the silence that followed, something unexpected happened. Cordelia's left hand, hidden beneath the table, trembled. It was a small movement, but Torin noticed it, and what he noticed he reported to Cale later with the dispassionate precision that made him invaluable. Her hand was shaking, Torin said. Not from anger. She was afraid. But there was something else. When you mentioned the termination order, her expression changed for a fraction of a second. I have seen that expression before. I have. It is the expression of someone being reminded of a thing they have worked very hard to forget. Kao considered this. A file, he said. Does Cordelia have children? No. The Greyhaven records indicate 2 miscarriages, both early term, roughly 8 and 11 years ago. After the second, their healers declared her unable to carry to term. Carol said nothing for a long time. That does not excuse what she did. No, Torin agreed, but it may explain the specific cruelty with which she did it. The delegation from Greyhaven left empty-handed. Cordelia's report to Alpha Harlan, whatever it contained, resulted in 2 weeks of silence from the South. It was not the silence of acceptance. It was the silence of planning. Lyra was furious when she found out about the meeting. She confronted Cale in his study, a room lined with maps and books that smelled of old leather and candle wax, and she told him in a voice that shook with anger that she was not a thing to be negotiated over in her absence. I know, he said. Then why did you do it? Because if you had been in that room and heard the things Cordelia said about you, I would have killed her. In the neutral hall, in front of witnesses, and that would have started a war I am not ready for yet. The honesty of it stopped her mid-argument. Not the words, but the way he said them, with a flatness that made clear he was not exaggerating for dramatic effect. He was stating a tactical reality. If Lyra had been present, his control would have broken. She sat in the chair across from his desk. The babies were active, kicking and rolling, and she pressed her hand to the spot where one of them was pushing a knee or elbow against her abdominal wall. You cannot protect me from everything, she said. I can try. That is not how this works. If this is what the bond says it is, then I need to be part of it. The decisions, the conversations. The ugly parts. You cannot keep me in a warm room and bring me broth and baking tools and pretend the world outside is not trying to drag me back. He looked at her from across the desk, and she saw the war in him. The part that wanted to lock every door and station guards at every window and ensure that nothing touched her, ever, and the part that understood she was right. You are braver than I am, he said. She almost laughed again. That is demonstrably untrue. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to be in the room where the worst is said. I would rather fight an army than sit through a meeting where someone calls you property. Then we will sit through it together, she said. And if you need to kill someone afterward, we can discuss it. He stared at her for a long beat. Then that fractional smile again, the devastating one. Acceptable terms, he said. 3 days before the winter solstice, 2 things happened that changed everything. The first was that Lyra shifted. It happened in the courtyard, during what had become her afternoon walk. She was watching the young wolves train, her hands wrapped around a cup of Petra's ginger tea, when she felt her wolf surge, not the gentle pressing she had become accustomed to. A surge, total and overwhelming, like a wave that had been building far offshore and was now crashing. She dropped the tea. The ceramic cup shattered on the stone. She fell to her knees, her hands hitting the cold ground, and the shift took her before she could think about it. Her bones rearranged, her muscles stretched and reformed. Her skin rippled, and then she was through, and she was standing in the courtyard on 4 paws, panting, shaking, alive in a way she had never been before. The wolf was white, not grey, not silver, not the pale cream that some wolves called white. White like fresh snow, like bone, like the moon at its fullest. And she was not small, she was enormous, nearly the size of a beta male, with lean, powerful haunches and a ruff of fur around her neck that stood on end. Her eyes, when she caught her reflection in the water trough, were silver. Every wolf in the courtyard stopped moving. Sarah, who had been leaning against the wall cleaning her nails with a knife, dropped the knife. The word that went through the training yard, whispered from wolf to wolf with the particular breathless quality of a revelation, was Moonblood. In the old histories of the wolf clans, before the territories were divided and the kingdoms established, there had been a bloodline called the Moonblood line. Their walls were white, Their eyes were silver. They carried the power to heal through touch, to calm feral wolves, to survive wounds that would kill any normal wolf. The line had been believed extinct for 4 generations. It was not extinct. It had been hiding, suppressed and starving, in a servant girl in the Greyhaven pack. Cale felt the shift through the bond like a detonation. He was in the war room, and he was in the courtyard in under 90 seconds, shifting as he ran, his massive black wolf barreling through the halls with a speed that knocked 2 paintings off the walls and sent a serving card spinning. He burst into the courtyard and skidded to a halt. She was there, white wolf, silver eyes, standing in the center of the training yard with her tail low and her ears rotating, processing the world through wolf senses for the very first time. Everything was louder, brighter, sharper. She could smell each individual wolf in the courtyard, their unique scents layered over each other like music. She could smell the bread baking in the kitchen. She could smell the pine trees beyond the walls and the snow that was coming. And she could smell him. Her wolf turned toward the black wolf at the edge of the yard, and everything else ceased to matter. His scent filled her entirely, pine and storm and the deep, warm musk of home. And her wolf moved toward him without hesitation, closing the distance that her human self had been so carefully maintaining. They met in the center of the courtyard. His wolf was larger than hers, but she was not small, and when they stood nose to nose, silver eyes meeting amber, the bond between them became visible. Not literally, but the wolves watching would later swear they felt it, a pulse of energy that radiated outward from the 2 of them like rings in water, warm and electric and undeniable. Cale's wolf pressed his forehead against hers. She let him. Her wolf pressed back. Around them 60 wolves watched in silence, and not one of them had to be told what they were witnessing. The Alpha King had found his mate. His mate was Moonblood, the rarest and most powerful bloodline in wolf history, and the pack that had abused her, starved her, broken her wrist, and tried to kill her children had thrown away the single most valuable wolf-born in 4 generations because they were too stupid and too cruel to see what they had. The second thing that happened was that Alpha Harlan came for her. He did not send a delegation this time. He came personally, with 40 warriors, at 3 in the morning on the night before the solstice, through the southern border where the tree coverage was densest, and the patrol rotation left a 10-minute gap that his scouts had been mapping for 2 weeks. Lyra felt them before the sentries did. A wolf, newly awakened and hypersensitive, registered the intrusion as a wrongness in the territorial fabric, a discordant vibration that jolted her out of sleep, with her heart hammering and her hands on her belly. She was in the room Cale had given her, a chamber adjacent to the healing ward that was slowly becoming hers, with her bread-making tools on the shelf, and a quilt Maeve had contributed, and a window that looked out over the courtyard. She had insisted on her own room despite the bond's pull, and Cale had agreed with the visible physical effort of a man fighting his own wolf on every front. She was out of bed, and at Cale's door in 30 seconds, pounding on the oak with her good hand. He opened it immediately, fully awake, fully dressed because he had felt it too, through the bond, through the pack link, through whatever ancient instinct had kept him alive through 19 years of alpha combat. His eyes were gold. His body was already shifting at the edges, muscle rippling under skin. How many, she said. He was silent for a beat, reading the pack bond. 40. Maybe more. Southern approach. He looked at her. Go to the safe room, below the kitchens. Petra knows the way. No. Lyra. I said no. She held his gaze with a silver-eyed steadiness that had replaced her old flinching deference in the weeks since her wolf awakened. I am Moonblood. I may not know what that means yet, but I know I am not going to hide in a cellar while my mate fights my war. Something passed between them that was not words. A recognition, an acknowledgement that the frightened, starving woman who had collapsed at his border was gone, replaced by someone who had always been underneath, waiting to stand up. Stay behind me, he said. Beside you, she corrected. His jaw tightened. Then he nodded once and they moved. The battle for Blackmere was short and brutal and decisive. Alpha Harlan had expected to face Cale's patrol wolves and perhaps a handful of senior warriors. He had not expected to face the full strength of a pack that had been awake and mobilized in under 3 minutes, because he did not understand the Blackmere bond. In Greyhaven, information traveled through chain of command slowly, with politics at every node. In Blackmere, it traveled through the pack bond like a nerve impulse, and every wolf in the stronghold was on their feet and shifting before Harlan's forces cleared the tree line. Cale hit the southern border like a black meteor. His wolf was the largest on the field by a factor that made the size difference between other wolves seem trivial. He moved through Harlan's warriors the way a blade moves through water, not with rage but with precision, each strike calculated to disable, disarm, remove from the fight. 3 warriors went down in the first 10 seconds. 5 more in the next 10. Lyra stood at the edge of the battle and watched, and as she watched, something happened that she did not understand until later. One of Harlan's warriors broke through the line, a grey wolf, large, fast, heading directly for her with the single-minded focus of a wolf, following orders. Kill the Omega. Remove the leverage. Harlan's final play. Lyra's wolf erupted from her without conscious decision, the shift so fast it felt like a door slamming open. White fur, silver eyes. And then, as the grey wolf lunged for her throat, she did something that Moonblood wolves had been doing for centuries but that she had never been taught and did not know she could do. She roared, not a growl, not a howl. A sound that came from somewhere deeper than her throat, deeper than her wolf, a sound that seemed to come from the frozen earth beneath her paws and the winter sky above her, and the ancient, terrible lineage that ran in her blood. The sound hit the grey wolf like a physical force. He stumbled, he slowed, his eyes glazed, and then he was on his side, not dead, not wounded, but absolutely still, paralyzed by a command that was older than language. The effect rippled outward. Every wolf on the field felt it. The Blackmere wolves shook it off quickly, their bond with Lyra through Cale acting as insulation. The Greyhaven wolves were not so lucky. 12 of them went down instantly, frozen in place, their wolves unable to move. The rest faltered, confused, their coordination shattered. Cale hit Alpha Harlan in the gap. The 2 alphas met at the center of the field, and the impact was seismic. Harlan was large, experienced, vicious. He fought dirty, going for the throat, the eyes, the hamstrings, but Cale was larger, faster, and fighting with the particular cold focus of a wolf defending his mate and his unborn pups, which was not so much a motivation as a biological state, a mode of existence that elevated every reflex and removed every hesitation. It lasted 90 seconds. It ended with Cale's jaws around Harlan's throat, the older alpha pinned on his back in the frozen mud, his wolves scattered and immobilized around him. Cale held the killing grip for 10 long seconds, not tightening, not finishing, waiting. Harlan submitted. It was not graceful. He went limp, his ears flattening, his tail tucking, the whine that came from him stripped of all dignity. And in that sound, Lyra heard something she had not expected to hear. Not defiance, not anger. Relief, as if some part of Alpha Harlan, some deeply buried fragment that had been drowning under decades of power and cruelty and the particular corrosion that comes from never being challenged, was grateful to be stopped. Cale released him. The silence that followed was enormous. 40 Greyhaven wolves, though still conscious, lay scattered across the frozen field. Blackmere's warriors stood in formation around them, breath steaming in the dark air. Not one of them having taken a significant injury. Lyra shifted back to human form. She was naked in the cold, but she did not feel it. Her wolf's warmth lingered, and the babies in her belly were calm, eerily calm. as if the moonblood power that had just immobilized 20 wolves had also soothed the 2 lives growing inside her. Kayla shifted beside her, and someone, Sarah perhaps, threw a coat over her shoulders. His hand found the small of her back. She let it stay. Alpha Harlan lay in the mud in human form, a gray-haired man in his 50s with a barrel chest and the particular look of a bully who has just discovered that the world contains bigger bullies. Blood ran from a gash in his shoulder where Cale's teeth had broken skin. Cale looked down at him and spoke in a voice that carried across the field like a bell. "You will return to Greyhaven. You will release every Omega in your pack from servitude. You will present the warrior named Dex to my border within 7 days for judgment. If any of these conditions are not met, I will come to Greyhaven personally, and I will not come to negotiate." Harlan looked at Lyra. For a moment something moved across his face. Not recognition of her as a person, exactly. More like the belated understanding of a man who has been throwing away diamonds because he thought they were glass. "She is Moonblood," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Yes, we did not know." Cale considered this statement with the expression of someone being told that water is wet. "You did not look," he said. "That is not the same thing. Take your wolves and leave my territory." "You have until sunrise." They left. The winter solstice ceremony happened at dusk the following day in the great hall of the Blackmere stronghold, where the fireplace was roaring and the long tables had been pushed against the walls to create a space in the center. Every wolf in the pack was present. Some stood, some sat on the tables. The youngest pups perched on their parents' shoulders. Lara stood in the center of the space wearing a dress that Petra had somehow procured in the correct size despite the ballet, dark blue wool with silver stitching at the collar and cuffs, simple and warm and the nicest thing she had ever worn. Cale stood opposite her. He was in black as always, but he had shaved and his hair was combed and the scars on his face caught the firelight in a way that transformed them from damage into geography, the terrain of a man who had survived everything the world had thrown at him. The ceremony was old, older than the stronghold, older than the pack structure, older than the kingdoms. It involved words in the old tongue that Maeve spoke in her capacity as eldest wolf, and it involved a bite, because that was the way of wolves. But first, Cale spoke. "I am not good at this," he said, and his voice was rough in a way that had nothing to do with volume. "I've led this pack for 11 years, and in that time I have given exactly 1 speech that was longer than 3 sentences, and Torrin reminded me afterward that it was terrible. So I will keep this short." He looked at her. Amber eyes, the wolf visible but held, leashed, waiting. "I found you dying at my border. Starving, broken, carrying 2 lives that no one but you was willing to protect. In 3 weeks you had turned my kitchen upside down, argued with me more than my entire war council combined, shifted into a wolf that hasn't existed in 4 generations, and paralyzed 20 enemy combatants by yelling at them." A ripple of laughter moved through the assembled wolves. "I have spent 11 years building a kingdom," he said. "I did not know until you that I was building it for someone." Lara felt the tears come, but she did not fight them. These were not the tears she had cried in Greyhaven, alone in the kitchen at midnight, muffling the sound with a dish towel. These were different. These were the tears that come when something inside you that has been clenched for years finally releases. She stepped forward. He met her. The space between them closed to nothing. "I'm going to touch you now," she said. "Please," he said, and the single word broke in a crack in his voice that made 60 wolves look away in the particular discomfort of witnessing their fearsome alpha be completely undone. She placed her hand on his chest. Over his heart, she could feel it beating fast and hard, the heart of a man who was afraid not of armies but of the possibility that this might be taken from him. His hand came up and covered hers. His other hand cupped the back of her neck, his thumb tracing the place where the mark would go. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "I had been crawling toward this my whole life," she said. "I just did not know it was you at the end." He marked her. The bite was precise and deep, his canines elongating just enough to break the skin at the curve where her neck met her shoulder. It should have hurt. It did not. It felt like the last tumbler of a lock clicking into place. A sound she felt in her bones, in her blood, in the two small lives rolling against her ribs. The mate bond completed. The effect was immediate and staggering. She felt him, all of him, not just his presence, but his emotions, his thoughts, the vast complex architecture of his mind. She felt his wolf, enormous and ancient, pressing against her wolf with a tenderness that was almost unbearable from something so powerful. She felt the pack bond extend to her, 60 threads connecting her to 60 wolves, each one a unique frequency, a distinct personality, a life she was now responsible for, and to. She mobbed him back. Maeve had told her she could, that the Moonblood line carried the ability, and when her teeth found the same spot on his neck, the sound that came from him was not pain, but completion. The hall erupted, not cheering exactly, howling. 60 wolves shifting as one, raising their voices to the vaulted ceiling in the ancient wolf song of bonding, the sound that meant new life, new connection, new strength added to the pack. The sound shook dust from the rafters and rattled the plates stacked in the kitchen and carried through the frozen forest for miles in every direction, a declaration that needed no translation. The Alpha King of Blackmere had claimed his mate. The Moonblood wolf had come home. Later that night, after the celebration had wound down and the hall had emptied, after the last toast had been drunk and the last song howled, Lyra stood at the window of the room that was now theirs, not hers, not his, theirs, and looked out at the snow that had begun to fall. Cale stood behind her. His arms were around her, his hands resting on her belly, and the twins were kicking against his palms with an energy that made him laugh, a low, quiet sound that she felt in his chest, against her back. "They will be fighters," he said. "They will be bakers. Bakers. I am going to teach them to make bread before you teach them to fight." He pressed his lips to the mark on her neck, and she felt the bond pulse between them, warm and steady and alive. In the courtyard below, a single white wolf paw print was slowly filling with new snow, and beyond the walls the forest of Blackmere stood dark and silent and patient, the way home always stands when you have finally found it.